Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. To start today, we can actually talk about Too Much, the spell read, which the discussion has already posted, and it is quite long. I think part of the deal with this book is that there's a variety of subjects that are addressed within this sort of thesis of being a too much woman. I think it's one of those things that you understand from like a lived experience. Maybe you're the kind of person who constantly thinks of yourself as too much, or alternatively, you think of yourself as too much and not enough at the same time. And I think that's really what this book addresses. The reason that I was so adamant about the fact that it is part memoir and part literary analysis is because I feel like the literary analysis and historical and sort of, there's also a lot of pop culture references that are part of it, are really helpful for setting the context, but it does revolve around this person's story as you read and follow along with how she describes her life and how she feels about where she fits into the world. You may have thoughts about that as well. So while I split the discussion up into the various subjects and then also the literary works she mentioned, you are also welcome to reflect on your own personal experience. I mean, there is a lot of really interesting discussion to be had about this book, potentially too much discussion. But yeah, I think it was a big deal for me to read this because I've sort of had the suspicion for a long time that people over romanticize the Victorian era, because I think that I even recognize in myself that like women who are cool or who are low maintenance, they seem to be like the ideal. And it does seem to be an extension of these sort of Victorian qualities of just like, you basically don't even exist. You starve yourself for others emotionally and physically. And just sort of this idea of what makes a good woman. It's very specific to the Victorian era. What's appropriate for how women behave or what women want, how we deal with sex, sexuality, and gender. Is not really that old, you know? We make it sound like, oh, historically these things have never been acceptable. Gay relationships have never been acceptable. Transgender is like a new thing. When in reality, it's not really. And the rules that we have about stuff like pink for girls and blue for boys is really not that old. I think it's very interesting to put that into historical, sociocultural perspective. And if you have anything to discuss in particular about this, some of it is stuff I've talked about before. My one issue is particularly in the first couple of chapters when she sort of conflates masculine qualities with feminine ones. She may just be defining them differently than me, but one example that she brought up was, you know, she talks about Jane Eyre being like a character with gumption, whereas I think of Jane Eyre as, yeah, she's a very interesting female character because she's different, you know, not like other girls. But she doesn't afford that same, she's the one who's not like other girls. Other women are all the same. It's just Jane Eyre. And so you can either relate to Jane Eyre and that's it. And there's no sympathy spared to the other women in the book. And that, like, you know, so I feel like it's something that doesn't carry into contemporary times as well. And she didn't necessarily look at that. She calls Hermione a too much character, whereas I feel like Hermione is, you know, essentially saved by her competency, which is sort of a male characteristic. I mean, Hermione gets to be the genius of the book, but she also doesn't get along with the other women. So it's kind of the same situation where it's like she occasionally relates to other women, but she doesn't have very good relationships with them. It's just sort of a weird, I think, in my opinion, the too much character who is unfairly treated is Cho Chang. But if you want to talk about that, it is in the discussion post and we can talk about it anytime. Yeah. So I got a lot of questions about my writing in various ways, how it's a career, how I research books, stuff like that. So I kind of want to answer a lot of those questions all together. Some of this may be repeat information, but you know, things are constantly evolving as I try to figure out this like very new career path basically and learn more things about it as I go. So since we haven't addressed this stuff in a while, someone asked me how I make money. People often ask this as if it's an uncomfortable question, But I think that it's really actually quite important to talk about. I think that the more transparency we have about creative careers and art, the better it is for actually valuing our artists and creatives correctly. If not correctly, then realistically. I always refer back to the conversation I had with Lil Kimura because she's got a really great take on this, that, you know, everybody wants art, but nobody wants to pay artists. And you can't really have one without the other. Artists, writers, this is not really a way to make a lot of money. I am married and I depend on my husband's salary. So when someone asks me, you know, how do I make, they're basically saying, you know, how is it possible that you supplement a writing career with more writing when like freelancing doesn't get you a lot of money? I wasn't talking about freelancing. I was talking about self-published work, my self-published books. And, you know, I could make more money doing that, but that's never been my goal. My goal has just been like, I have these books, they're available. I make some amount of money. I make $1 off of every sale. So, you know, it doesn't ever become something I could live on. It's just sort of a supplemental income situation. If I really wanted to make a lot of money doing it, then I would really need to look into marketing, promotions. There are ways to make money, but I know those aren't my skill set, which is why I always wanted to do something that was more hybrid. Adult, contemporary fantasy that doesn't really market all that well, that I do for me, or, you know, for my audience that I already know I have, that I enjoy writing. And then traditional publishing, which, not to say that I like that any less, but I'm doing it more with an eye to how do we sell this book? The money that I have made has come from my advance from the publishers and our agreement on what will be the forthcoming royalties. It would not be enough for me to live on alone. It certainly helps, but yeah, the important thing is that I have a husband, so I have another income. And I think it's really important to be extremely upfront about the fact that if you're quitting your job to go into a creative pursuit, you don't really make money right away. Essentially, you make money once you have a pipeline of things. Then your income is slightly more regular because you have people who are still, they're discovering older things. And, you know, like you wouldn't put out one self-published book and make a year's salary off of that, most likely. What you would have to do is regularly put out work or be extremely successful in traditional publishing, which again is not going to happen on your first book. It's going to happen, if it's going to happen at all, it's going to happen down the line when you have multiple offerings. There are exceptions to this, of course. I don't think it's practical to aim to be the exception. And I think it's just truer to the experience of being a creative to really look at the reality, which is that if you want to be a writer and you want to do it full time, which a lot of people are not doing it full time. That's the other thing. I am, but again, that's because I have my husband. Other people either have to split their time with their full-time job and their writing, or they get money from family, or they get money from their spouse, etc. Assuming that you are able to pay for art, you should do it. Not only does it allow those specific artists a living wage, but it makes it so that as a whole, we are paying all artists and all creatives what art is actually worth. I understand theoretically the argument that like, well, people should have access to books and it's not fair that the industry limits things. There's some people have access to books and some don't. There's different rounds of publication. Like My Mechanical Romance will only be available in the United States at first, and who knows how long it will take to get to other places. So I see why this is very frustrating, but if you steal books, no one has data on that. You know, things that are pirated, there's no way to tell how many people have actually read the book. So all it ends up doing is showing that the author makes low sales. They will get either lower advances or they won't even get another contract. So just things to bear in mind, especially when it comes to authors of color in publishing. I understand the theoretical argument that people want to make about having access to art, but it's not the artist's fault that you can't have access. And it also only publishes the artist and not the publisher or the industry in any way. If you were having sort of one of those questions of like, should I quit my job and become a full-time writer? You'd have to have a second source of income lined up. Am I worried about having less creative control over my traditionally published novel since I've been used to full creative license with my self-published works? Am I worried about it? No. When you make the decision, what kind of writer do I want to be? This is one of the questions that I think you have to ask yourself, is because there is a cost to both self-publishing and traditional publishing. In traditional publishing, the cost is you're giving up some of your agency when it comes to creative control. I have a very good agent who did negotiate for me to have some, like basically consultant rights when it comes to the book jacket summary or the cover. In recent years, there was some, I can see the book and I can't think of the name or the author's name. Wonderful. There were misleading pronouns in the book jacket summary, but the author had nothing to do with those things. So sometimes, maybe often, I would say that is the case, but I do get to weigh in on what the publisher chooses, which makes me feel good because there are people of color in my book and I want to make sure that's represented on the cover, blah, blah, blah. But I don't get to choose who makes the cover, which is sad for me. But anyway, so yeah, giving up creative control, having to, I don't want to say argue, but certainly having to have discussion with an editor about what my intention was, what this character's functions are, stuff that I don't normally have to defend. Yes, I have to do in traditional publishing because I am answering to someone else's money. But then that's the benefit, right? That it's not my money. I'm not the one who's invested in the success or failure of this book. I just wrote the book. And ultimately that's the thing. Now I'm going to have someone who's going to help me with marketing, which I'm not good at on my own. I don't really like it. And I don't have a lot of instincts for it. I don't have any instincts for it. So yeah, that was something that was like, if I'm going to make this a viable career, then I have to do traditional publishing because there are plenty of people, I'm sure, who are good at self-publishing and who really enjoy the parts of self-publishing that are not my skill set, such as social media marketing, running promotions, really understanding the ins and outs of how to use Amazon's platform, and also keeping on top of other platforms. It's really hard to know like what is going on behind the scenes with business type things. I feel bad that my books are only available on Amazon because I knew it wasn't a great company, but every time they do something that's worse and worse, it's just sort of like, okay, well, it made the most sense for me to choose to self-publish with Amazon because their self-publishing platform is excellent. It's the best one, I would say, that I know of. And anything else would have cost me a lot more resources. But now it's like, my money is tied to their money. Like it's not a great feeling. But there were lots of people who were worried about whether Barnes & Noble their self-publishing imprint was going to go under. It's a lot of stuff, a lot of being aware of that portion of the industry that I, A, didn't want to have to do, and B, am not really necessarily skilled at. I want to focus on writing, which is something that I can do with traditional publishing for the most part. It will be on me to do marketing and stuff like that. It's not like I could just publish the book and then see if it sinks or swims, but definitely the success of the book is based less on how successful I am at marketing it and more on how much of the budget that the publishing company is going to put into it. And they have more resources than I do. That's what it ultimately comes down to for me. Hi, Olivie. I've started reading the Atlas 6, as everyone in your ass apparently has. Yep, I don't know. Just hit me how much research you must have done for it. Yes. Yeah, a lot. I don't even know if I would call it active research. It was just a lot of reading a bunch of different kinds of books and formulating my thoughts. I think the actual writing part was not very long. Probably wrote the book in total in about 8 weeks, but it took me months before that to like really flesh out what I thought I was going to do with the magic system. Yeah, so I was wondering, how long does it take for you to write a book? This varies quite a bit. It depends whether I am, like how I'm doing it. So with the Atlas 6, I was writing, I would say about 10,000 words a week. So it took me longer than 8 weeks probably. Maybe more like 10, because I was also writing other things. I was actively writing fan fiction at the time. I was revising another manuscript. There was a lot going on. So yeah, I think that at the time, what I was doing 10,000 words a week, split up into approximately 1 to 2 days a week. My Mechanical Romance, that took me 6 weeks, which I was doing again 10,000 words a week on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I distinctly remember that Tuesdays and Wednesdays were my mechanical romance days. But 12th Night is another story because I was writing it during the pandemic and also while pregnant, which my brain is not, it's not at its peak. Not even close. So I was doing about 2,500 words a day of just that. That was the only thing I was writing. And the book that I'm working on now, at this point, I'm writing another manuscript because I just need something to do until my due date. But normally I like to have multiple projects because usually figuring something out in one plot will unlock something for another plot. I've said this a lot. I like to have really different projects though. I do not like to write very similar manuscripts because one is just more interesting to me and I pick that one. But then I usually have like a palate cleanser of something that's very different. You know, assuming that I have brain cells again and like if the world changes. Oh, by the way, I got my first dose of the Moderna vaccine. So like, not that the world is going to change immensely, but my fear of it can like slightly alter, I guess. Things are still questionable, but it's a little better. And if anyone has not had theirs, which I assume is a lot of people, my advice is to really, really hydrate. I was a little bit fatigued. I was very thirsty. My arm did hurt, but not any worse than like a flu shot or the HPV vaccine, which for some reason I remember very distinctly as being painful for my arm. It was not really a big deal, but drink a lot of water. And was I worried about doing this pregnant? Not really. I was really hoping that that there would be research that would show that like, you know, I would pass along antibodies to the baby. And it seems like initial research does show that to be true. So great. Comorbidity with pregnancy and COVID was scarier to me than the idea that something could happen to the baby. I did not feel like there was really a scientific basis for that fear, although I understand why people would be nervous. Anyway, an example of what I think I will probably do at the same time is continue working on this manuscript and also writing the Atlas Paradox at the same time. Very, very different works. Different works, different age groups, but generally it helps me to be working on two very different things because it means that my brain is kind of juggling a lot of things, and knowing one thing, figuring one thing out might help me in another plot. Does the research for one project inspire you to write the next? Not really. Alone with You in the Ether uses a very similar analysis of time as the Atlas 6, but I wouldn't say that they inspired each other. It was more that like these projects just overlapped in time, and so they have some things in common. I think the answer to what you're generally asking is yeah, it doesn't necessarily lead into the next project. It's more like things that I work on at the same time are, I think if you were to dissect them, likely to have overlapping threads. I actually wrote Alone with You in the Ether before I wrote the Atlas 6, even though they came out in reverse order. It was essentially that I had an idea about the way I wanted to use time in Alone with You in the Ether. And then I actually researched that a little bit more more scientifically in terms of the physics, specifically quantum theory, when I wrote the Atlas 6. And then when I was editing Alone with You in the Ether, I used what I had learned to like legitimize my initial wavy time theory. So yeah, but that's the only example I would really give as like having direct influences on each other. These next two questions are kind of similar. I'm going to call them a little bit similar, even though they're very different. One of them is more about me. My question for you is about law school. I saw that you went to law school and I was shook. I had no clue. So I just wanted to know, how did you know you were making the right choice dropping out? Honestly, I've been considering it since day one, but I'm in so much debt already. Sometimes I swear I can feel the weight of my actions on my shoulders. I mean, those of you who are familiar with my backstory already know that like it kind of was out of my hands. My mental health was like really a mess. And it was just kind of like, okay, do I want to be healthy? I can't be healthy and in law school at the same time. I really didn't feel like it was the right place for me. If you guys have read A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihira, I'm not necessarily recommending it because it is, I loved it, but it's very heavy. It has a lot of trigger warnings. You'd have to check those out if you were interested in it. But there is a very interesting passage about people who don't succeed in law school, and it specifically talks about how novelists don't do well in law school. And it was just kind of like, yeah, it was like I was trying to force my brain into this box that was just, it just was not meant to be in. And I just kind of realized that I didn't have to resign myself to being miserable. It wasn't what I thought it was. And as, you know, costly a mistake as that is, it didn't have to be the end of the world. But that being said, I totally understand that is a very, very good reason to stay in law school, especially because as a lawyer, not even as a lawyer, just as a person with a law degree, you're likely to make a lot more money. But, you know, it kind of comes down to, what kind of misery can I stand and for how long? I think we all know it's not so much a question of should I go or should I stay. It's more like you already know what you want. And then it's just like, what price are you willing to pay in order to choose you, in order to prioritize your happiness, what that means for you. The line I always quote from Mr. Blake is, that's the price you have to pay for the chance to do what you want to do. You have to know what that price is for yourself. And for me, law school, that price was too high. It was the cost of my sanity. Too high. And then we have, do you ever feel like you're running one step behind everyone else? I don't know if I'm just getting old or what, but I'm so lost on things like if I should be investing in Bitcoin or NFTs or other cryptocurrencies. Are they the future and something I'll regret not jumping into in order to set myself up financially, but also they're bad for the environment, so should I be ignoring them? Also, it feels like in order to be successful now, you have to be your own brand, and I don't know how to brand myself or code. I'm 30 now, but no one told me by the time I was in my mid-20s trying to find a career that having a brand and knowing how to code were actually going to be key factors in being successful. I don't know who you've been listening to. I certainly think that these are, they're useful skills. I don't think that you live or die by having them. It feels like 18 years of school wasted because by the time I graduated, literally nothing that was taught applied to the world works anymore. Long rant, but the point of it is I was laid off from the service industry last month because of COVID, and I have no idea how to go about making money anymore, and it's daunting. Yeah, I mean, this is really the thing. It's like you're in a period of transition. What do you do here? It's different. It's different from the previous question in that you don't have the autonomy here that the previous person has. They're sort of asking, how do I know what's the right thing? And you're asking, okay, well, I have to make a choice. I have to move forward somehow. It comes down to the same answer of just what price are you willing to pay in order to secure your future. Do I think you need to know about cryptocurrency? Not really. In my answer to you on Tumblr, I said that I actually don't think that's the future so much as the present. I think things that feel ubiquitous right now, people call them the future, but they're not, because if we can see them now, then they're here, Your way of making money and making a life for yourself does not necessarily mean predicting what's going to come next. It would be great if we could do that, obviously. But I always think that the most important thing is that you invest somehow in what you're passionate in. That doesn't mean that you monetize all your hobbies or you turn your interests into a brand. It just means that you kind of have to follow the trail that your interests leave open for you. Your interests, in a lot of ways, your interests determine your skills. What you're drawn to is a reflection of what you enjoy, which also has a lot to do with what you're good at. Synergy. If you really feel like you don't know enough, you could retrain. That is a thing. If you wanted to go back to school or if you wanted to get some sort of certification for whatever it is that you don't know how to do that you feel is the thing that you would want to do, then maybe that means you have to really juggle things for a little while. And it's the price you have to pay for the chance to be what you want to be. I mean, you just have to open as many doors as possible and you have to follow as many paths that you can see as possible. And I do think this actually does become easier in your 30s. There's something about you arrive at your 30s and all of a sudden you see more opportunities that weren't there before. Doors suddenly appear and you have the maturity to know whether or not you should walk through them. This is the great thing about your 30s. I always think that talking about your interests is really, really important to like literally everyone, to anyone who will listen, because a lot of times you don't see the way things are connected, but someone else will connect those dots for you. You never know who knows someone who's going to be able to tell you, oh, have you thought of this thing? Have you considered doing this thing? In terms of job searching, women often presume that they have to have 100% of the qualifications, but in reality, you don't. I mean, the person that would have 100% of what they're saying they want in that job would be underpaid for that job. So if you have even like 60 or 70% of what a job is asking you to have, then you should still apply for it. Most men are going to. Don't think of your work experience in terms of titles. Think about it in metrics of like what you have actually done, achieved, accomplished, and try to break those things down into what skills did you develop? What are you good at as a result of this job that you did? Women are just more likely to have imposter syndrome, but the truth is that you can and you will learn on the job, and the expectation is every like job posting is essentially the beginning of a negotiation. They're like, we want you to have all these things, and you're like, okay, well, I have these things, and you negotiate from there. Try to think of it that way, as opposed to like, you know, a teacher giving you an assignment and you have to have met all these pre-qualifications. But yeah, I mean, it's a hard question to answer because I don't know what your skills are and I don't know what you were educated in, but I don't believe that all your education is useless. I don't think that that's, things move quickly, but we also have a lot of tools at our fingertips. You could learn to code now if you wanted. There are lots of programs where you could figure out how to do that, and a lot of them are free. But that's not saying that you need to learn to code. You don't have to be a computer programmer in order to make a living. You just have to make sure that you're seeing the doors that are open for you. Sometimes you have to think of this as an incremental process, though. That's just like, I will figure out this first step. And this first step doesn't have to define the next 20 years of my life. It just has to move me forward. When Mr. Blake decided that he wanted to be a teacher, he was initially like, well, I think I have to get a degree in education. And I was like, actually, I don't think so. Where I went to school, we had some experience with the flaws in LA Unified School District. And one of them is that it's really hard for them to find qualified teachers. And in fact, a lot of teachers don't have certifications. And so I told him, I was like, why don't you just apply anyway? I happen to know that what they did was file for emergency credentials, where like for a year, you don't have to be credentialed. You just have to be working towards having credentials. So yeah, he actually got hired right away because what he wanted to teach was physics, which it's really hard to find physics teachers. He won Teacher of the Year his first year teaching. So like, this was a very good investment, but it was kind of a ballsy move. He didn't think he could do that, and I happen to know that he could. So this is what I mean about talking to people, because you never know. Doors are there, and how do you spot them? By being very open about what it is you're interested in, what you're thinking about. And then for me, you know, my change of career was just a huge gamble. It was like 4 years of let me write for free and hope that this gives me the experience to really create something that someone's going to want to put money into. And I was right. And, you know, it's a huge risk. And I was able to take it because I had someone to support me, bringing me back to point one. But yeah, you kind of have to recognize, you know, maybe make a list of what your resources are, and then where you would want to be at this time next year. Again, don't jump too far forward. We're not looking at like, how do you start making a 401k and put down your down payment for your house or whatever. We're talking about, where do you want to be at this time next year, and how could you get there? Hopefully that helps. These videos, I have to edit them so much more now because I go on for way longer because I lose my train of thought so many times. But I think I've covered everything. Go ahead and join the Too Much discussion if you want to. You're welcome to also just chat about things that I brought up, even if you didn't read the book. I keep saying that for this book specifically because there's just so many topics that it's less of a let's analyze this text and more like, what do you think about this point? So yeah, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.